So the Scottish First Minister, Humza Yousaf, started off the debate. He said there are now 1 million people displaced in Gaza and they need to be given refugee status. He said Scotland has got its doors open. Well, it's not just his decision, it's the British government's decision. But I think the answer now has to be no. And here's why.
Nigel Farage's stance on not accepting refugees from Gaza is rooted in several key arguments and concerns that he has articulated over time. His position reflects his broader views on immigration, national security, and cultural integration.
Since the Brexit referendum, we've taken in over 500,000 asylum seekers. People from Afghanistan, people from Syria, people from Hong Kong, people from Ukraine. We're told the net migration figures are as high as they are because of these exceptional circumstances. And then comes along Gaza, another so-called exceptional circumstance. According to the United Nations, UNHCR, there are 80 million people in the world displaced or living in regions that could be defined as being going through war. There has to be a limit. We can barely put those that come legally to Britain, let alone those that cross the English Channel in boats. 400 hotels are full. Social housing waiting lists are at the longest they've ever been. So there is a problem simply with numbers. Do we want to be generous and kind? Yes. Does there have to be a limit on it? I believe absolutely. But think about this. Of all those people displaced from Syria, Saudi Arabia, one of the biggest, richest states in the whole region, did not take one single refugee. Egypt today won't take one single refugee from their neighbours in Gaza. Why? Because both of those countries want to preserve their own culture and are worried about terrorists getting through. I would suggest if the Arab neighbours of the Palestinians won't take them as refugees, that it's just about the last thing we should do. And think about it. The first duty of the British government is to protect the country and its people. And the risk of people coming in who are linked to Hamas is simply just too great. Take Spain. Over the last 3 years, 16 people have been arrested coming into Spain with known ISIS links. How many have come in where we don't know about their background, their history, but that could be linked to ISIS? So there is an issue here of national security. And then there's the issue of integration within British society. Just today, a report from a guy called Simcox, who's working for the Home Office as an independent, and he says one of the problems that we've seen over the last couple of weeks with problems on our streets, hatred, celebration of the mass murder by Hamas in Israel, the problem is too big a levels of immigration and too little integration. If we go on allowing millions and millions of people more over the next decade to come into our country with whom, frankly, in terms of culture, we have nothing in common historically or in any other way, then don't be surprised to see a divided Britain. Don't be surprised to see more marches on the streets of London, Belfast, Edinburgh, Manchester, Birmingham, or wherever else it may be. We are becoming an increasingly divided, and I have to say, intolerant society. And that's all about who we let in. I'm not being harsh, I'm not being unkind, I'm being realistic. No country through centuries has done more to help those in genuine need than the United Kingdom. No one's done more for genuine refugees. And there may well be a case for women and children displaced in Gaza and elsewhere. But we just have to say, enough is enough. And we cannot risk this legion of young men coming into our country, whether it's from there or across the channel. We can't allow it to happen. It's not good for our country. It's not good for our communities. It's not good for our society. And it puts all of us at risk every single day. The time has come to stand up and say no.
National security concerns. Farage frequently cites national security as a primary reason for his opposition to accepting refugees from Gaza. He argues that the situation in Gaza involves complex political and security dynamics, and there is a risk that individuals entering the UK from such a conflict zone might pose security threats. Farage's concern is not limited to potential terrorist threats, but also includes the broader implications of vetting individuals from regions known for ongoing conflict and instability. He asserts that the UK's current immigration and asylum processes might not be sufficiently robust to handle the complex security screenings required for individuals coming from high-risk areas. Farage believes that without rigorous vetting, there is a potential risk that individuals with connections to extremist groups or violent ideologies might enter the country, thereby compromising national security.
First, let's just deal with the news of the day. Do you support the government's proposal for a national service?
They don't support it either. It's a joke, isn't it? I mean, look, what you do, you get a focus group of half a dozen Reform voters in a room, and the chairman says, now, what about national service? Oh, I think it's a very good idea. The rest say, yeah, actually, not a bad idea. Oh, policy. So, I mean, look, when you're a weak leader, and Sunak is not a leader in any way at all, you're a follower. So you follow what the focus groups say, and you say, by doing this, I can attack the Reform vote. That's what it's all about. And look, it's totally impractical. The army has shrunk from 100,000 to 75,000 in 14 years of conservatism. And most interestingly, we have a growing number of young people in this country who do not subscribe to British values, in fact, loathe much of what we stand for. So what do you do?
Who are we talking about there?
Oh, I think we see them on the streets of London every Saturday.
What do they look like? Oh, we're talking about...
What do they look like?
Are we talking about Muslims here?
We are. And I'm afraid I found some of the recent surveys saying that 46% of British Muslims support Hamas, support a terrorist organisation that is prescribed in this country. So we've, and what's interesting is that this Prime Minister is building up far more of that population than anybody before in history.
Well, this is very interesting, and we don't have that survey in front of us, but let's just unpick what you've just said. Are you sure you want to make the blanket accusation that you've just made that Muslims are somehow less patriotic than other British people? Because those people on those demonstrations are British.
Did you watch the recent elections that took place up and down the country?
We don't know that, and we don't know they support Hamas. Would you like to revisit what you said at all?
Let's be clear. There is a growing population of people in this country, a lot of them very young, who have recently been voting for and electing candidates, right, up and down the country, in inner cities, who stand for a set of values that are completely, not only don't subscribe to our values, but in many cases are totally against our values. And the marches, there are some on those marches. Equally, there are lots of upper middle class girls called Jocasta on those marches as well, and I understand that. But we have to face the fact, and at some point, by 2029, the Labour Party will have to face the fact that they started a policy of irresponsible, open-door immigration, but nobody in history has allowed more people in who are potentially going to fight against British values than Mr. Sunak. And if you look at those figures last week, if you look at the sheer numbers that were coming in last week, you really have to ask yourself some questions.
Well, is this the thrust of the Reform campaign, that actually immigration means that our values are threatened, and particularly we are unhappy about Muslims? Because that is a pretty incendiary proposition.
We have never before seen anything like this. You think about West Indian immigration into Britain, the post-World War II.
I think of very little else.
West Indian immigration into Britain post-World War II. There were a lot of shared things there. Shared history, shared culture, shared religion in many cases. Most families that came could say one of their family had served with British forces in World War I, World War II, love of cricket. The list goes on, but there were commonalities. And, as you know with your previous job, the key to immigration is integration. If you get integration, it works. What we've done is, and this works on several levels. We've done...
I'm going to stop you there, and I'm going to say two things.
Well, here's the difference.
No, I'm going to tell you something about the difference. First of all, you're right. I come from that stock. But let us remember that my stock, my ancestors, for the best part of 700 or 800 years, were Muslims until they were forcibly converted to Christians by slave owners. So when you talk about Muslims as hostile to British values,
No,
I've got to say, I don't really. Let me finish what I'm going to say. I don't really see I don't really see how you arrive at that conclusion. And secondly, trying to say to me, you know, actually, you guys are not really like these other guys. I mean, you and I have known each other a long time. Can you imagine how offensive that is to a British Muslim? Let me ask you to put yourself in the shoes of a British Muslim, and can you imagine how offensive that feels?
How many people from your community fail to speak English?
How many people?
From the West Indian community don't speak English.
Integration challenges. Farage has expressed concerns about the integration of refugees from Gaza into British society. He argues that the cultural and ideological differences between Gazans and the UK population could create significant challenges for social cohesion. Farage is critical of what he views as a lack of effective integration strategies for newcomers, suggesting that accepting refugees from Gaza could exacerbate these issues. He has pointed to past instances where rapid and large-scale immigration has led to the formation of isolated communities rather than promoting integration. Farage argues that refugees from Gaza, given the specific socio-political context of their origin, might face additional hurdles in integrating into British society. This, he believes, could lead to further social fragmentation and undermine national unity.
We all speak English, but actually so do most Indian Muslims, so do pretty much all Pakistani Muslims in this country.
I can take you to streets in Oldham where virtually no one speaks English.
I've been there too, but honestly, come on.
The point I'm making is this.
Seriously.
I am not here to attack the religion of Islam, but I am here...
Well, you've just been doing it for 3 minutes.
No, I haven't. I'm telling you the alarming figures that have been coming out of these recent polls, particularly in the wake of what has happened on October the 7th and in Gaza, and we have a real problem here. We want...
All right.
I mean, firstly, all right, numbers on immigration need to be sensible, otherwise everyone's quality of life gets diminished. Diminished. Diminished in every way. Diminished because you can't get a GP appointment. Diminished because you can't travel anywhere without traffic jams. Diminished because getting on a housing ladder is impossible, because we now need to build one new dwelling every 2 minutes.
I want to get on to
and that's apart from...
I want to get on to politics, but I just want to be absolutely clear, and I want to give you the opportunity to be clear, because everything you've just said suggests that the Reform platform for this election is every problem you face is down to immigrants and in particular to Muslims. Is that really what you're saying?
No, actually, most people aren't yet affected by this, because the areas with anti-British values tend to be geographically, at the moment, very tightly concentrated. But they do pose a problem.
But you're not resiling from blaming that community.
I'm blaming elements of that community. I'm not blaming them, I'm stating a fact. All I'm doing is stating a fact. No one else dares tell the truth about this. On the broader question, the biggest single problem this country faces is the population explosion. And it will not be debated in this election. Why? Because Labour started it and the Tories accelerated it. Okay. And that has led to problems on a scale that are unimaginable.
Okay, I want to debate that. And let me start it talking to you about this way. Your flagship policy is zero immigration, net zero immigration, right? I talked to James Cleverly earlier on about the fact that net migration numbers are falling a bit.
No.
Well, I know the fact. Let me finish my... There's a fact.
No, I'm really sorry. Let's get this right.
They are falling a bit. They're falling by 10%.
They are not falling, and here's why. Last year's legal migration figures were 606,000 until they were revised later.
I know, they've gone up.
745.
You haven't let me finish my question. You haven't let me finish my question.
But it was the wrong premise.
No, I want to put some facts to you.
I just did to you.
Inward migration last year, end of 22, was 1.2 million.
Yeah.
Actually,
staggering.
It hasn't fallen in 2023, and in that sense, you're correct.
Oh, thank you.
But what's interesting is who the migrants are. No.
Economic considerations. Economic concerns also play a role in Farage's stance. He argues that accepting refugees from Gaza would place additional strain on public services and resources. Farage is critical of what he views as the high costs associated with providing for refugees, including healthcare, housing and social services. He suggests that the UK's resources are already stretched thin and that adding a significant number of refugees could further strain public finances. Farage's arguments are framed around the belief that the UK should prioritise its own citizens and manage its economic resources more conservatively. He argues that the potential economic impact of accepting refugees from Gaza needs to be carefully considered, particularly in the context of existing economic pressures and public services.
So Scotland's First Minister Humza Yousaf said he is willing to take Gaza refugees, and there's pressure from Egypt for the UK to do the same. Some would say it's our moral duty, of course.
So would you welcome a Gaza refugee into your home? We did so with Ukrainian refugees. We're joined by GB News' own Nigel Farage to discuss this. Nigel, your thoughts. What do you make of Humza Yousaf's comments that Scotland is open to refugees from Gaza?
Well, it might be for him, but I don't suppose for one moment it is the majority of Scottish people. I mean, look, since the Brexit referendum, we've taken in over 500,000. They've come from Syria, they've come from Afghanistan, they've come from Hong Kong, they've come from Ukraine, and we keep being told, well, these are exceptional circumstances. Well, here's yet another exceptional circumstance. So firstly, in terms of sheer numbers, I think we just got to say enough's enough. And secondly, isn't it interesting that Egypt won't take any refugees from Gaza? Do you know why? Because they don't want to import terrorism into Egypt, just as Saudi Arabia didn't take a single person after the Syrian conflicts. So if their neighbours are not prepared to take any, I frankly don't see why we should do so. And, you know, when you get this morning an independent report, a line to the Home Office with independent, says we already have a problem as a result of integration being poor because of mass migration. Well, how many more people do we want marching on the streets of London, demonstrating? There is actually a cultural element to this that I think is very important. So we've always been a very generous country, but if the rest of the Arab states aren't prepared to help, why on earth should we?
Nigel, I think it's really important as well to point out that most Muslims who live in this country are peaceful, they are kind people, they don't wish any harm on other people. But we have failed, perhaps, to recognise a sort of existential threat, you might say, of radical extremist Muslim jihads, and the threat that they pose to a Western way of life here. Who would you hold culpable for that, which could at best be perhaps naivety, maybe, if we're being generous? Who do you lay the blame? Blair, to some degree?
Yeah, not your viewers. Not your viewers. The Labour and Conservative parties who lie to the British public at every, and it's a strong word, but I mean it, they lie to the British public at every general election, telling them numbers coming into Britain, sheer numbers coming into Britain, will be under control and will go down. And we're now at record levels of legal net migration, huge numbers, as I've said already, of refugees coming since 2016. And that's before you even start to talk about the young men from very different cultures crossing the English Channel. The first duty of the British government is to put the safety and security of the country and its own people first. And if you allow millions of people in who come from cultures that are very different from ours, with whom we have very little in common, it's no surprise that we've got these massive problems of integration.
Oh, Nigel, I just want to ask you whether you believe politicians have forgotten who they're working for. Surely, when it comes to immigration policy, it should be about what the British people want and need, and national security should be top of the government's agenda. For someone like Humza Yousaf, it appears that he is more concerned about supposed international humanitarian duties, but not really necessarily about what the Scottish people want.
Look, I mean, frankly, there is no issue on which our main political parties all around the UK and the populace are further apart. I can promise you, if there was a national referendum held on how many people should come to Britain legally, on what we should do with those that come illegally and how many people we should take to war zones around the world, we would get a very different result to that is produced by the Westminster Parliament and indeed the Scottish Parliament.
Nigel, we've been debating this morning the relative merits of Rishi Sunak being out there, the cost of him going there to the British taxpayer, but also to the Israelis who are having to keep him safe while he's there, and the benefit that he might bring on that trip. Where do you stand on it?
Well, cost is a very marginal point here. I mean, we are at a moment where there is a real danger of major escalation in the Middle East, which could profoundly affect the lives of all of us around the world. I think it's right that Rishi Sunak. I'm very surprised how little has been said about the British citizens that have been killed, or should I say murdered.
Political and ideological concerns. Farage's opposition to accepting refugees from Gaza is also influenced by his broader political and ideological views. He often frames immigration in terms of preserving national identity and cultural values. Farage is concerned that accepting refugees from Gaza might lead to a shift in the cultural and demographic makeup of the UK, which he views as detrimental to British values and traditions.
And the British citizens that are still being held hostage. It's almost as if we've forgotten about these people. Well, I certainly haven't. And I absolutely hope that top of Sunak's list is finding out what the plan is to extract our people who are being held hostage right now. I understand a detachment of the SAS is on its way, but also worth noting that the Americans yesterday, well, Biden's always a bit jumbly and stumbly, but he was perfectly clear that American intelligence said that the bombing of the hospital came from a misfired Hamas rocket. Absolutely clear. That's what the American intelligence believes, and that's now actually what most of the world believes. And yet Rishi Sunak refused to be drawn on that, refused to say earlier on, look, let's be clear, this was a Hamas misfire. And I wonder why he's running away from that. Is it that he fears even bigger street protests on the cities of our country?
Yes, well, Nigel, earlier we spoke to human rights lawyer Ivan Sampson about the question of whether we should take in refugees from Gaza. Have a listen to this and then can you react to what he says for us?
If somebody's a genuine refugee and wants to claim asylum here, we should have safe routes to do that. Look, Lebanon has 22% of its population as refugees. We have 0.6%. It's just a complete lie to say we've been overrun with refugees. It's just simply not true.
OK. Well, go on, Nigel, your reaction to that.
Well, we're not Lebanon. We are the United Kingdom. We have, look at it. We're putting people on barges. We're filling up over 400 hotels around the country. If Ivan Sampson is saying we don't have a problem with housing people, whether they're genuine refugees or people illegally crossing the channel, then frankly, he's in cloud cuckoo land. And I think all through the centuries, there is no country in the world who has actually got a finer record of genuinely helping those in. We've done more than our fair share over the course of the last few years. Enough is enough. And Ivan, if you listen to the UNHCR, there are up to 80 million people around the world displaced. How many millions does Ivan think should come? I'd love to know the answer.
Yeah. OK.
They never have an answer to that.
No, it's always one that's slightly dodged. But Nigel, thank you so much.
He argues that there is a need to maintain a clear distinction between the UK's national identity and the cultural and ideological backgrounds of incoming refugees. Farage's position reflects his broader concerns about maintaining the cultural integrity of the UK in the face of increasing immigration from diverse and conflict-ridden regions. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and for more content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel.